Welcome to the deep dive. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today, we're tackling a legal document you sent our way, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. A Supreme Court resolution straight out of the Philippines.
Ooh, interesting. What's it all about?
We're talking bank mergers, union battles, the whole legal shebang.
Sounds like a recipe for some serious drama.
You bet. So, picture this. Bank of the Philippine Islands, BPI for short, merges with the Far East Bank and Trust Company, FEBTC. This is back in 2000. Now, BPI already has a union, and their collective bargaining agreement has this thing called a union shop clause.
Right, union shop clause. That's basically a rule saying if you're a new regular employee at BPI, you got to join the union. No two ways about it. Part of the deal.
Gotcha. So where's the conflict? What's the catch?
Well, the merger, right, it brought a whole bunch of FEBTC employees over to BPI. Now, the question is, are these employees considered new and bound by that union shop clause, even though they were already regular employees at FEBTC?
Ah, I see the dilemma. A legal puzzle for sure. So this didn't get resolved with a simple handshake, right?
Oh, absolutely not. This thing went through the ringer. Started with a voluntary arbitrator, then escalated to the Court of Appeals, and finally, bam, landed in the Supreme Court of the Philippines.
Wow, talk about a legal odyssey. All right, let's break it down. Who won that first round? The voluntary arbitrator.
BPI actually snagged the first win. They argued that those FEBTC employees weren't your typical new hires. I mean, they were already regular employees, just at a different bank before the merger.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I bet the union wasn't thrilled.
You guessed it. They weren't having it. They appealed, and the Court of Appeals flipped the script, sided with the union. Their reasoning was that excluding these folks from the union shop clause would basically render it useless, defeat the whole purpose. They were worried about companies using mergers to, sneak in a bunch of non-union employees and undermine the union's power.
So it was about safeguarding the union's strength, preventing companies from playing fast and loose, right?
Exactly. And the Supreme Court, in the end, backed up the Court of Appeals, agreed that those absorbed employees fell under that union shop clause. They seemed pretty keen on maintaining a strong, effective union.
Okay, Supreme Court sides with the union, but I'm sure BPI didn't just roll over. What were their main arguments?
They put up a good fight. BPI's legal team was sharp. They argued that the union shop clause was designed for employees who started in non-regular positions, then climbed the ladder to regular status. It wasn't meant for people who were already regular employees, like those coming from FEBTC.
So they were getting into the nitty-gritty, the wording, and the intent behind that clause.
Exactly. Trying to demonstrate that it wasn't applicable in this particular situation. And get this, they even pointed to dissenting opinions from 2 Supreme Court justices. These justices were worried about the whole thing infringing on the absorbed employees' freedom of association, their right to choose whether to join a union or not.
Whoa, dissenting opinions within the Supreme Court. Now that's intriguing. So those justices were basically saying, hold on, you can't force people into a union. What about individual rights?
That's the gist of it.
Yeah.
You can see how this case touches upon a major debate. Individual freedom versus the power of collective bargaining.
A tough one, for sure. So how did the union counter that? What was their comeback?
Well, the union had a pretty smart response. They said, hey, this merger was BPI's choice. They willingly chose to merge with FEBTC, meaning they also chose to take on all the FEBTC staff. Basically, they were saying BPI couldn't pick and choose which parts of the merger to honor.
Love it. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too, right?
Precisely. They also reminded the court about the whole purpose of the union shop clause. It's about empowering employees, giving them more leverage to negotiate for better working conditions. They argued that weakening the union would ultimately harm the workers, including those absorbed from FEBTC. Makes
sense. So 2 strong arguments clashing. How did the Supreme Court navigate all that back and forth and reach a decision?
Well, the Supreme Court, they did something kind of interesting. They didn't just, pick a side and say case closed. They really dug into the nitty-gritty and tried to find a solution that worked for everyone.
Okay, color me intrigued. Tell me how they pulled off this legal balancing act.
Well, first off, they acknowledged those dissenting opinions we talked about. Those justices who were worried about forcing people into the union.
So they didn't just ignore those concerns?
Nope, not at all. In fact, to make sure things were fair for the FEBTC employees, they made a couple of things super clear. For one, they said that when a merger happens, the surviving company, like BPI in this case, automatically takes on all the employment contracts of the absorbed employees, meaning their employment and benefits are protected.
That's a big win for those employees. It sounds like the court wanted to make sure they didn't get a raw deal just because their bank was merging.
Exactly, trying to ensure some stability. But here's where things get kind of tricky. The court also said that legally speaking, those absorbed employees were still considered new when it came to that union shop clause.
Wait, hold up. How can they be new if they were already regular employees at another bank? I'm a little lost.
Yeah, I know it's a bit of a head scratcher. But the court's logic was that the employment relationship between BPI and these employees officially began on the day the merger went into effect.
Yeah.
So even though they weren't new to being regular employees, their relationship with BPI was brand spanking new.
Oh, okay. So it's all about the timing and the legal specifics.
You got it. And the court really emphasized that this interpretation was crucial for keeping the union strong. Think about it. If a merger suddenly flooded the company with a bunch of non-union members, it could totally weaken the union's bargaining power.
Right. It'd be like tipping the scales.
Yeah.
They were saying, hey, we need to protect the union structure so they can keep doing their job and advocating for all the workers.
Exactly. But they didn't stop there. The court also put some safeguards in place for those absorbed employees. They gave them a 30-day grace period to decide whether or not they wanted to join the union. So no one was being forced in right away. And they stressed the importance of due process, meaning BPI couldn't just fire anyone without giving them proper notice and a chance to be heard.
Wow. So they really tried to find that sweet spot, upholding the union's rights under the clause, but also looking out for those absorbed employees.
Absolutely. It kind of shows how the legal system is constantly adapting to the changing landscape of the business world. Mergers and acquisitions are happening left and right, and the courts have to figure out how to apply these existing laws to these new scenarios.
Makes you wonder if the people who wrote that union shop clause all those years ago ever imagined it would be applied in a merger situation like this.
It's a good question, and that's what's so cool about law. It's constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted as new situations pop up.
It's a living, breathing thing. So tell me what really stands out to you about this case. What makes it so fascinating?
What gets me is how this seemingly simple clause, the union shop clause, ended up causing such a big legal battle. It shows how even the most straightforward legal language can have these hidden layers of complexity.
Like peeling back an onion, right? What seems simple at first glance turns out to be much more complicated.
Exactly. And that's why this case is still relevant today. It reminds us that we can't just take legal language at face value. You got to dig deeper. Think about the context, the intent, the potential consequences.
So it's a reminder that the law is dynamic, always evolving.
You got it. And that's why it's so important to have a legal system that can adapt and respond to these new challenges. This case is a perfect illustration of that.
You mentioned those dissenting opinions earlier. I'm really curious to hear more about what those justices had to say. It's always interesting to get those different perspectives, especially in a case as nuanced as this one. What were their main concerns?
Well, they felt that forcing the FEBTC employees to join the union was going too far.
So they weren't saying union shop clauses were bad in and of themselves, just that there were limits to how they could be used.
Yeah, that was their point. They believed everyone should have the right to choose whether or not to be in a union. Making it a condition of employment didn't sit well with them.
It does make you think about, consent and free will. These employees didn't exactly sign up for this merger. It just kind of happened to them.
Exactly. And those justices felt the court should have given more weight to the employee's perspective, acknowledge their right to make their own decisions.
It's like being told you got to join a club you never even asked to be a part of.
Right. A tricky situation, for sure. And it's interesting how the majority opinion tried to address those concerns. They recognized that the union shop clause could potentially clash with individual rights, but ultimately felt that the benefits of a strong union outweighed those concerns.
So they were aiming for that balance, protecting individual freedoms while also recognizing the value of collective bargaining.
Exactly. They argued that a strong union could ultimately lead to better wages, working conditions, benefits for all the employees, even those who might not have personally chosen to join.
Like saying, in the long run, everyone wins when there's a union that can fight for workers' rights.
Right, and they even pointed to the Philippine Constitution to support their reasoning. You know how it emphasizes social justice and the protection of labor?
So they were putting this decision within the broader context of the country's values and legal framework.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about one clause. They were considering the bigger picture, the impact on society as a whole.
It makes you realize that legal decisions aren't made in isolation. There are so many factors at play, social, political, economic, even philosophical.
You hit the nail on the head, and that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not just a dry legal dispute. It gives you a glimpse into these deeper questions about the role of unions, workers' rights, the balance between individual freedom and collective action.
Definitely gives you a lot to chew on. So we've talked about the arguments, the appeals, the Supreme Court's decision, those dissenting opinions. What's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will glean from this deep dive?
I think the big takeaway is that labor law is never truly settled. It's always changing, evolving to keep up with the way work is changing. New business models, new technologies, new ways of working. The law has to adapt to keep pace.
Like trying to catch a moving train.
Exactly. And this case shows how courts are wrestling with these changes, trying to find that balance between protecting workers and giving businesses the flexibility they need to succeed in today's world.
So it's not just about memorizing rules, it's about understanding the principles and how they can be applied to new and unpredictable situations.
You got it. And that's why cases like this are so valuable. They make us think critically about the law and how it shapes the future of work.
It's been fantastic exploring this case with you. Thanks for sharing your expertise and insights.
Happy to do it. It's always a treat to dive deep into these complex legal issues.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope you found this deep dive into Philippine labor law informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.